We'd like to welcome you today to our second class of the day, Finding Your Ancestors in Books by Elder Tanner. We'd like to thank him for the time and the effort he takes to help us understand more about family history. This BYU Family History Library is associated with Brigham Young University and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And as such, we do have religious overtones sometimes in the discussions, but these classes are intended for a general audience. And so if you can keep that in mind with the questions you ask, we'd appreciate it. If you have more specific questions, we're always available to help. So we'll now turn the time over to Elder Tanner.
Well, we're going to talk about a topic that is one of my favorite things to talk about, because from the moment I began reading and figured out that you could read, and that's something that I have been doing all my life and enjoyed and working in libraries over my years and been very much involved, even in the last 18 years as I've been working in the Mesa Family Search Library and then now here in the BYU Family History Library. So we are going to talk about books as we do a little bit of moving here. The question in the presentation is, can you find your ancestors in the books? And the answer is very likely. It's very likely that you can. There's some qualifications to that. It's not universal. Not everybody makes it into print during their lifetime, but you'd be surprised how many people do. And if we expand the idea of books being more than just literature or whatever you want to call it, into all of the reference materials and all of the other published materials that are out there that were published on paper up until the last very short period of time when all that content began to be digitized and made available through the internet. So we're looking at something that's still an extremely valuable resource for people who are involved in doing genealogical research or any kind of research. But in this case, we're going to talk and focus on genealogical research. Now, first of all, we need to highlight the fact that that FamilySearch.org has been digitizing books now for some considerable period of time. At one time, most of the books in the Family History Library in Salt Lake City were removed because they had been digitized. And they decided that that wasn't the best idea they'd ever had, so they moved a considerable percentage of those back into the library because there are some kinds of research that are easier to do, rather, I guess easy isn't a word to use in that context, that are doable in books that are not yet as facilitated by having the book online. And that means also that you may not be able to find the book online because there are still some books and there are still tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of books waiting to be digitized. So they have over 660,000 digitized genealogy books. Now they fall into two categories. One is those that you have complete access to and can search completely word for word. And if you wish to do so, download a copy to your computer and store and have it on your disk for your own reference. And the second category are all those books that are currently or possibly under copyright and which are there and basically are just like a catalog entry. And we'll talk a little bit about those books because basically there's a way. And what I urge everyone to do is when they run into that is to go to some other sources that I'll talk about in a minute that are available and may very well have the book available for you to look at completely and search completely online, even though it is copyrighted. So we're going to kind of move in that direction as I go through this. And the reality of my assertion about the books depends on where and when you're looking and how much research you've already done. It is more difficult, I would say, to start out from zero and jump into doing research in books because you don't necessarily have the perspective to understand whether or not the book is accurate or whether it's your person as opposed to the same name person that may be born in the same place at the same time and yet is not your person. So there's all these different considerations that make it something that you need to have some experience, and you not only experience in genealogy, but experience in doing research and in evaluating records for accuracy. And so all of this is part of the parcel that comes along with doing research, but it's also something that seems to be more important when you're doing research on in original documents like books and books that have information. Fortunately for us today, and as time passes, this number is growing very, very rapidly. We have millions upon millions of books that have been digitized and are searchable, completely searchable online, word for word, giving you right to the topic, going right to your searches inside of these books. Now, what we're looking at here is the Internet Archive, and I did a video presentation on this, or class, or on the Internet Archive just a short time ago, so it'll be on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. But today we're talking about books, and the Internet Archive is now, as far as my perception and anything that I have seen or can look for online, is absolutely, without doubt, the largest accessible library in the world. Now, I don't know if Google has digitized more books than the Internet Archive, but I can assure you that the Internet Archive has made more books available than anyone else. And they have digitized the books. And they now have, and this is as of today, when I prepared this a couple of weeks ago, when I began doing this series and I did the research on this and put together the PowerPoint, this was just over 35 million books. And now there's an additional almost 300,000 more books in just the last couple of weeks that have been added. So the Internet Archive is growing extremely rapidly for this kind of a resource. And if you want some comparison, the Library of Congress, and I look at their website very frequently, and their information has 23 million books, but they're not all digitized. In fact, only a very, very small percentage of those books in the Library of Congress are digitized by the Library of Congress. If you go to the Library of Congress website, you're going to be looking at a catalog. They'll tell you, yes, we have this book, but you can't see it. If you go to the Internet Archive, you can say, they say, yes, we have this book, but you can also read the whole book, or you can download the whole book, or you can borrow the book and read it as if you were checking it out from the library. And so this is kind of a deal changer for people who are doing research in books, because there's just never been any kind of access to everything that is here. And I'll be showing how that works as I go through this. I think we need to ask the question, what kinds of books are we looking for? What is it we're looking for out there? Are we looking for books that have the names of our ancestor? Well, yes, that would be lovely. And yes, they do exist. So we're going to I'll run through here kind of quickly all the different categories that I think. We have surname books. Now, a surname book it's a generic term for books that talk about an individual and an individual's family. So, for example, in my line, there's a book called John Tanner Family, and there's another one called the Henry Martin Tanner, the History of Henry Martin Tanner, an Arizona pioneer. So basically, I call these generically surnamed because they're focusing in on a certain family with a certain, and usually a certain person, either a famous person in the past and tracing ancestry from that person, showing who his forebears were, or connecting to that person because that person has some descendants, and so they're called Descendancy Books. And so there's all these different kinds of books. So here's Descendancy Books, which take an individual and tell categorizing all of the people who are descendants from that person. Now, some of them are more complete than others. Some just pick and choose the descendants that they highlight, and some are exhaustive as much as the resources of whoever wrote the book had available at the time. And then you have Ascendancy Books, and I mentioned that, in taking a person and saying all of their ancestors, trying to trace their ancestry back. So all of these books kind of go which direction you're going. And then we have books that have records copied from the originals. Now, this is an attempt to preserve records. And it's done by the court systems in the United States and around the world. And it's done by genealogical societies. It's done by historians. It's done by anybody who finds information that may be ephemeral in the sense that it's going to vanish. And so they want to preserve it. They copy it or abstract it. That makes a summary of it into a book. And then they publish the book. And these books are tremendously valuable because it's very frequently that the fear that the original records would be lost is accurate, and that the records are no longer available. And the only place you come to those books are here in the copies. There are exhaustive sets of these books in some states. Rhode Island, for example, had an individual who spent a considerable portion of his life simply copying all of the information out of all of the records in Rhode Island. And these books have become extremely valuable over time. And then there are local and national histories. Generally, the histories of, for example, one example that almost always generates some information is that if your ancestor was an original a landowner or inhabitant of a particular area, if they were the first people to move into a state, or which is now a state, or settle someplace, it is almost certain that at some point in time there was a history written of that county or a history written of that state, and they will often mention and sometimes give biographies of the original inhabitants. And so it's a very good place to go for local histories. That tells you what. With biographies, obviously, anyone who is interested in an ancestor for whatever reason may have written a biography. And there are biographies of some of my ancestors. And the reason why there are biographies is not because they were overly famous. It's because they, for some reason, fell into a unique category. And we mentioned Henry Martin Tanner because he was one of the very first settlers who came down from Utah as a pioneer into Arizona. And the time frame there puts him in Arizona just shortly after practically anyone was coming to Arizona except for the native population, which was already there. Compilations of specific groups. There are books written about Italian immigrants, about Irish immigrants, about all of the people who lived in a certain area. There's just you have to understand that there's just like a flood of different types of books and things out there. There's almanacs. You often think of an almanac being something like the Farmer's Almanac, which mentioned the weather patterns and agricultural use and everything. But those books are valuable because they do talk about the local population, and they do have people featured in them. And so they can have some particular references. Bibles obviously are a source for a lot of information about families. There are large collections, and if you are aware of a Bible, it is that has genealogical information that's valuable. This can be the pivotal piece of evidence that you need to connect a family and find out how to get started going back back in time. It's this kind of thing is that unless you've looked for it, you don't know they're there. And if you look for them and you don't find them, then you get discouraged. But the fact is that Bibles moved around and that people carried them with them, and they may be sitting in someone's house today of a Bible that goes back into the 1800s or even longer. And they just simply don't understand the value that this has for a large number of people. But those are generally found by talking to and sort of, in a sense, educating those around you that this kind of information is valuable. Obviously, we have cemetery records, but there's also books, compilations of books. I'm going to go back to mentioning Rhode Island, and the other one would be Maryland, two states that I'm more familiar with, specifically familiar with the materials that have been created for cemetery or inventories, I guess is a good word to use. And the books that have been published on that basically have categorized and described and given the contents of every cemetery that has been found in those areas. There was the Anne Arundel County Genealogical Society in Maryland. There's one of the members of some of the members of the society, but primarily one lady who was spearheading that, has basically compiled every single burial plot in the state, in Anne Arundel County. And these are the ones buried in people's backyards, on farms, and in some cases in the island in the middle of the roads, where the dividing lines and the grass plots out there where people were buried. And so they kind of fixed the roads so they didn't disturb the burials, but there's a cemetery right there in the middle of the street. So these kinds of records, and they're published records, and they're available. There's a very common thing. Once a place has been around for 100 years, the people who live there have a tendency to have a celebration, and 100, 200, 300, 400 years, whatever. And they publish a book, and sometimes it contains a tremendous amount of information. In some of these cases, it's the people who have the money and donate to the cause who get into the book. But if they're your ancestors, then there also becomes very helpful. And if your guys were poor and didn't really get into any kind of this information, they may still be you may still be benefited by the history and the things that are in the books. Of course, we have church records, and we think of church records as being parish records and original church records, handwritten, generally speaking. There are a lot of books published where people have copied out that information out of the church records, and it's been published in books. We have Gazetteers. These are books that tell you where various places are. This is a long time before Google Maps and Wikipedia, but the Gazetteers are invaluable as far as discovering. The one that I became familiar with almost from the inception of my doing research in the libraries was a book called the Ortsbuch, which is a listing of the parishes and both Lutheran and Catholic churches in Germany. And there's many books like this that are extremely valuable. Some of them are now digitized, and some of them are now available on the major websites, but we're still in a situation where a lot of these are still in paper. Now, if you go to the Internet Archive, however, archive.org, you're basically going to find a lot of these materials because they have taken virtually whole libraries of books, and they are one of the ways that the material in the Library of Congress is getting digitized. And they're periodicals, and we're talking about periodical is a serial. They're called serials in the library, and the serials are anything published serially, monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever it is. And they've had society journals going back to the original ones in the early 1800s from the New England Historic Genealogical Society, which was the one to first publish a formal journal of history and genealogy. And there's many more. This is just a bare kind of a skimming the surface of the kinds of records that you might have found. So what are some of the challenges? Why isn't this something that everybody just rushes into the library and starts grabbing books? And the answer is very simple. There's kind of an underlying assumption that we have the internet and that's new, and we have Ancestry and Family Search and MyHeritage and Find My Past and all these other websites. And this is all new information. And this is where we can get it. And it's easy and we can get into these places. And the answer is, well, yeah, but the old books, and so there's kind of this mentality. It's like an old car. It's unreliable, or it's like an old, whatever, if whatever appliance you've had go bad in the last few couple of years. That's just not true. That is that's kind of a fallacy, because, for example, a book written 100 years ago means that your great-great-grandparents were still alive. And so if it talks about if your great-great-grandparents lived in a town and you find a book about that town and the people who lived there, they were the people who lived there. And they could go talk to these people and find out their information. So it could be this is the most reliable and the most accessible part of the information that you're going to find. So these books are valuable because they're old, not because they're old and not valuable because they're unreliable. And that's kind of a bad rap there that books have gotten. Yes, I have to say that there are parts of the book that may not be correct. There's a lot of family tradition, a lot of just simply traditional stories that were made up out of the cloth. I mean, they simply just threw in a history of a family that was not even vaguely related to your family. And I've done presentations and classes on that whole topic. But don't reject the entire book when some parts turn out to be inaccurate, because the inaccurate parts are usually pretty well identified. They'll say something like, we don't know for sure, but this is probably the wife of so-and-so, or we assume that. And anytime the language changes and becomes less than we know for sure, or we have a record right here that tells about it. The other part of it is that what you may not understand is that a lot of these reference books that we've discovered, as I'll show in just a few minutes, are completely sourced. They tell you, and they transcribe the wills, they transcribe the probate actions, they tell you where the information came from, they tell you how the deeds and the dates of the deeds and where the records were, and that was not unusual. It's possible, and it's done. I have whole books, whole hardbound books of what I would call a surname book going back, where not one fact in the book has a source. Nothing is there. It's just It's just written with this is this family, and here are the children, and this is family, and this is the children, but nothing telling us where that information came from. And so those books are obviously less valuable, but you do find the same kinds of things today on online family trees. So we can hardly say that we've overcome that difficulty. One of the other things is failure to check the sources cited by the old books, because that would be additional work. One statement I usually make is that doing research is checking the sources. Copying out of the book is copying. It's not genealogy. It's not genealogical research. It's just copying what somebody else has already done, whether it's in a family tree or whether it's in a book or whether it's wherever. So many people come to me and they say, well, all this came from Grandma Jones's book, and she wrote this book and published it, and we've just copied it all out of there. Well, yeah. And as we go back through it, we find out that Grandma Jones didn't do such a great job, and that a lot of the information is not correct. And the problem is, of course, that there are either no sources or that the sources haven't been checked to see that that information was correctly copied. So copying is not genealogy. So do your homework, do the background, find out if the information in the book is reliable and useful. And then the other part of it is very surprising, and that's having the whole book sitting there in front of you or available and not even using the information that's contained in the book. And the solution to this is to return to the book when you think you're done, because you may find out that this brick wall that you've had for years is simply your inability to go through the book carefully and see where all the information was that solved that problem many years ago. And the other half of this book is that we have in family trees today people making changes, wholesale changes to families that are entirely and completely sourced and researched in published volumes. And the most common one to recall is the Mayflower passengers, who are people seem to discover that they have Mayflower ancestors or think they do. And then you add in your people into the Mayflower because, I'm a descendant of this Mayflower person. So I've got to put my ancestor in here as a child. They overlooked my ancestor. The answer is those books from the Mayflower Society have been published for years, and the research has taken place over the last more than 100 years, and millions of dollars have probably been spent. And there is no controversy, and there are no new people to be added to those books. So basically, if you don't agree with some of these early books, then you probably are wrong. And you just have to know that that's the case. Okay, so here's a good suggestion, and it's something whenever I get involved with the family line, I now automatically do this, and that is I routinely check every new person or new family that I work on in all the big online digitals. I do that very simply by doing a Google search, because Google has picked up all of this information. And so I can go down and see the book websites, and if my ancestor's name shows up in a book website, I immediately go there and do a search to see if there is a book about that particular family, and kind of show how that works. So suppose you were searching for someone named Peter Sutton. That's this person, Peter Sutton. He says, it says that he was born in 1819. He was christened in 1819. There are 11 sources on this, and he's from Billinge in Lancashire, England. And let's see if he shows up in a book. Now, this is for an example, so it's going to turn out a little bit differently than you might suspect. So the question, though, is do you automatically think about searching for him and the Sutton family on the major book websites? So let's see if that works out. So there's several options to get started to looking for him or anyone on different large online digitized book collections. Now, these are the largest of the book collections that are out there. They're not all of the book collections. There's thousands or tens of thousands. There's just a huge number of digital book collections out there. But the focus of it is that by having the resources of the Family History Library in Salt Lake City and the resources of other large libraries, like with genealogical collections like the BYU Family History Library, as well as this comprehensive, almost black hole sucking in books of the Internet Archive or archive.org, that there's a very high possibility that you can go through and find something in one of these. So I would search first in familysearch.org and the reason on their books selections. The reason is that there are over 600,000 books, but they are specifically all genealogically oriented and genealogically valuable books. So this is a huge collection of books, but it's very valuable. And archive.org cannot be mentioned enough, because this is where so many of these books are available. Now, when you start searching for books, you've got to understand that books are cataloged. They're not necessarily cataloged in a way that you can find them easily. And so there's a learning curve involved. And you can do a search on Family Search, like I just did a few minutes ago, for a book about my great-grandfather. And I wanted to continue reading it because I started reading it, and I read it before, but I wanted to read it again and get the information from that book. And what happened is that I put in what I thought it would be a good search term, and it didn't, and said I didn't have the book. Family Search didn't have the book. So I went to an advanced search and did a different search based on the title only of the book, and was able to find the book. So learning that there's a learning curve here, and that you may not turn up that information. Now, on archive.org, the opposite might be the case. It might be there, but there might be 5,000 books that match your search, or more, hundreds of thousands of books. So basically what you need to do is be a little more specific on and look for names like, instead of looking for Peter Sutton, look for the Sutton family, or put Sutton genealogy or something of that nature. That would get more results. This is the Hathi Trust. Now, Hathi Trust is another huge repository for digitized books. The issue with the Hathi Trust is it's not like archive.org. All the books aren't available and copyable. They are, or at least available. The Hathi Trust is a conglomerate of universities and colleges in the United States. And basically, the libraries have contributed all of their digital material. And so there are millions of books here, but they're going to be books that you can't get access to unless you are actually part of one of the contributing libraries. Otherwise, but there are still a huge number of public domain books on the Hathi Trust and searchable. And then we have a newer organization called the Digital Public Library of America, or the DP.LA. And the Digital Public Library has determined to make all of their material available to people online. I don't quite understand the complexities of how they consider something to be made available or not, because they do have material that's not available, it's copyrighted. But by and large, they've produced a huge amount of information, and the numbers of items in their collection now is way above 45 million items to be searched. So it's got a lot of really kind of sophisticated search apps that go along with the DPLA. Google, of course, has Google Books, and that's also a good place. If you find a book on Google that is unavailable because it's copyrighted, or it's unavailable and it's only available in a preview and not read, then go to archive.org and look up the same book, or the Hathi Trust, and look, because it's very possible that, or Family Search even, it's possible that the book is available on one of the other websites. Okay, so when I got through doing this, a review of the sources, it shows that he apparently lived and died in England. And so here's an advanced search looking for records of Peter Sutton in England, and see if there's Sutton genealogy in England. And you'll see that there are some, and the question would be whether any of these are relevant to Peter Sutton. And going through the list here, there's only 5 results. None of those 5 results seemed relevant to Peter Sutton. But the key to this is that Sutton is a very common name in England and in the United States. And Peter is another very common name. And trying to find a book about a very common name family. And the other part of that is that one thing that I do know about these lines of ancestors is that they were not wealthy and they were not landowners. And in England, that would cause them not to be quite as, it's not as possible that they would ever show up in somebody's book because of that reason. But don't get discouraged. Let's try another example. This is George Sisson, born in 1644 in Rhode Island, one of my direct line ancestors. And he was born on the 7th of July in 1644 in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. And so let's see what kind of things there were for him. And as I put them in the familysearch.org, I say Sisson family as the subject and nothing else, and came out with 5,894 search results. Not going to be helpful, and because it's going to be really difficult to figure out if any of these people are related to me or in any way helpful, and especially in a book of 590 pages. So it looks like I need to be a little bit more specific and see if I can find something that is going to be more helpful. So let's look for George Sisson on Google with qualifiers of book and Rhode Island. And then what we have is a long list of books. And if we go down through that list of books, and we see that there's some references to different websites, there's various ones that could be them. But once again, we've got quite a few responses, and we're not sure if any of these are correct. But we're seeing in here that on the free pages of Rootsweg, for example, in the middle of there, that we probably have the same George Sisson. And it gives his mother and it gives some other information. So maybe we have some things here that we can use that would be helpful. And there was another one that's called, this is the same person. And it turns out that this particular person, which I had absolutely did not know this, was a deputy from Portsmouth to Rhode Island General Assembly in 1690 and 1702 and 5 and 7. And that's an interesting fact, but it means that he was at least prominent enough to get into the General Assembly of Rhode Island. So let's go to the Internet Archive and see. Well, I did Sisson family genealogy was my search, and I got a genealogy of the Sisson kindred in America, photostats of Bible records, and will copies of photostats and Bible records from it's given to the Newberry Library from the Daughters of the American Revolution. So this is some original documents, and see whether I can find it in another search. So there was some information about my person in this book, but not a whole lot. So let's try another one. So here is another search, and I found the Sisson family in Rhode Island, and it was descendants of Richard and Mary Sisson, and my person was directly in this information, and this is down 10 generations from 1608. And so you need to go kind of vary your search terms, use different things, use the genealogical terms that could be in a title or could be in somewhere in the book that would be pulled out by one of these websites. It's a little bit more involved than doing just a Google search on whatever you can think of. You've really got to kind of work at pulling out the words that turn out to be crucial in finding this information. Now, in this book, which are the descendants of Richard and Mary Sisson, it turns out here's George and Sarah Lawton and a complete history of his family. And this happens to be the same family. And you'll look, there's my direct line. So this is still my direct line ancestor because it's the one I started with, Richard, his father. And this is telling every source that this came from. So as you read through this, if you read through this, something like this, it will tell you references. It will tell you where all this information came from. And it tells you the pages that the information was taken from. So this is invaluable. And additionally, using the sources here, you can go back and not only verify what was here, but you can also amplify the information and find more information that perhaps was not all included in this particular book. So here's 10 generations down from the father of Richard Sisson, or George Sisson. So here we are, and his son Richard. Okay, and his family and all the sources. And basically that doesn't end the product. In other words, that isn't the end of the story. We say, oh, well, I'm all done with that because I can copy all this out. Well, if we assume that is correct, then what I do is I use the names to begin the research from that point. And that's where the research begins with those individuals that I've now identified in the book. I go in and say, okay, so here's his family. Now I can do some descendancy research from those individuals and build them up with sources from all of the websites and things that are now available. And the one thing that you cannot predict and cannot guess is absolutely the case in every time this happens, every time you begin, as to whether the searches will be productive. You just don't know. You have no idea whether someone at some point in time wrote a piece about your ancestor, no matter where they were, or included them in a book that was about someone else. But, for example, this book happened to be under copyright. It was a copyrighted book and fairly recent. But the thing about the archive.org is it gave me the option of borrowing the book for an hour at a time. And I could just keep borrowing it as long as someone else didn't borrow the book, and then they would only have it for an hour. So it was kind of like playing tag. But usually, I mean, the chances that someone else finds this book on archive.org and is going to try to check it out at the same time I do is probably so remote as to not having to even think about it. And what can I get from this information? Well, I can do an awful lot in an hour that gives me the names and dates of the whole family. And basically from there, I can start coming back to the book as many times as I need to. There's no limit on the number of times that you can check the book out. How do you check the book out? You simply register for Internet Archive. It's free. Everything with the Internet Archive is free. There is no charge. There's no agenda. There's nothing out there that you have to pay for. There's no premium version that you're going to get if you gave them a bunch of money. They are basically dedicated to having a free, open website with all of these millions and millions and millions of books. By the way, they also have billions of old websites. They're the Internet Archive. It's why they're called the Internet Archive, is because they make a copy of the Internet every week and every few days, and the entire Internet, and archive it and make it searchable. They have their books, they have videos, they have audio files, software files, images, and all sorts of other information. So they have all audio files, concerts, and there's just more information here than you can literally imagine happening. And if I were back in the days when I was going to the library every week, once or twice a week all summer, if I'd had this, I probably would never have left the couch where I was sat there and read. And I would have been what they call a classic reader's couch potato type person. But I did have to get on my bike and ride my bike over to the library. So I was getting exercise. So this comes up. Generally speaking, if the book isn't really restricted in some way, you can borrow it for up to 2 weeks. So, and it'll just return itself. You don't have to worry about returning it or anything or fines. It just disappears after 2 weeks. Immediately, you could check out again for another 2 weeks unless you run into somebody that's already checked it out. So here's the book, and I found it. By the way, I had only an hour to check it out on archive.org, but then I went over to Family Search and found the whole book. And when I did it, it went through, and then there was a download, and so I could just download the whole book. So now I download the whole book in PDF format, and I have an entire searchable copy of the book on my computers that I can use anytime without having to be renewing the checkout every hour. So this is kind of to illustrate the fact that the different websites will have different thresholds of how much of what access you can have to the books. And that's why you use all the different websites at the same time in looking for books. So here's why they might not show up. These are some of the reasons why you may not find them in a book. And that is the time period involved. So most of the books were written during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1900s and in the 1800s. A few going back later than that, and even further back in time. But the further you go back in time, the less likely you are to find books that are based on sources. They're going to be more based on speculation and probably aimed at things like the royalty and the nobility and things like that that are not necessarily well documented or even accurate. The relative economic status of the individuals are the main objective. It's in other words, when they're trying to write a book, it usually behooves them to write about people who had money because they're the people that'll buy their book. That's just the simple rule that there goes. And you'll find that if there's a Descendancy book, that they're more inclusive. In other words, you may show up, and as I do, I show up in a number of Descendancy books as a child, as the son of my parents. And obviously, I didn't have any resources at all as a 4 or 5 year old or whenever the book was published. So this is something where you're going to be able to find a lot more information out of the Descendancy books than you would out of some of the Ascendancy books. Always remember, they're subject to copyright, and they need to be released for public view by the copyright holder in order for them to show up in Family Search. To some extent, that's been circumvented by the Internet Archive by having those books available to be checked out. Because if they have a physical copy of the book as a library, they can loan the book out for a limited period of time, and that's why the time period changes. And so that's the way they get around the copyright issue. So you're just like you can go to your public library with a library card and check out books, then you can go to the Internet Archive and check out books. And there's other services online that do that also. And just a reminder that some of these may contain photos, family information, biographies, and extensive source citations. And some of them are informative and not as accurate as you would wish them to be. But then on the other hand, you are very much required to verify the information that comes from the books and to add additional sources now that you have some basic information about these people to do some research. And also, don't necessarily copy out all the information if it starts to say things like it does on this page. Mary B. born, we don't know. Order of birth, not known. Married, third, Elizabeth. Further research may show that the third wife was the daughter of Francis and Anna Colgrove of Westerly. This is total speculation, and it has been repeated and has been included in hundreds, if not thousands, of people's pedigrees because they just copied this information out as if it were absolutely correct. And it is not. It is totally incorrect. it is not the right person. And these are not the people who were married. So that's kind of the information thing you need to be careful of. So don't ignore this legacy of treasure in genealogy books. They're tremendously valuable resources, and it's just kind of skimming the top of the ideas here. And thanks for watching.